am now thrilled to welcome Olga Yurkova back to the stage. Good evening, Olga. How are you?
Yes, good afternoon, and I'm okay. Thank you. Today, here in Kiev, the first snow fell. Yeah,
Very good.
so I'm now in snowy Kiev. Yeah.
Well, welcome back. You, of course, came to Santa Fe a couple of years ago to talk all about Ukraine and stopfake.org. And we're thrilled to sort of get an update from you. I'll introduce you very briefly. Janet's going to stay on as well, and she will have some questions for you. And she, of course, will field audience questions as well at the end of the presentation. So folks, please enter your questions into the Q&A panel. So Olga, of course, is a journalist and founder of Stop Fake, an organization launched in 2014 to combat false news coming out of Ukraine. Stop Fake is now an advanced fact-checking organization that covers media in 11 different languages. Wow. Welcome back, Olga. I will turn everything over to you.
I think you're maybe going to turn it over to me first. I'm not 100% sure. Let me get.
Go ahead, Jen.
All right. That was such a lovely, smooth transition there. Well, Olga, it's wonderful to see you again. And my understanding is that you have a little presentation, and then I have some questions, and then I know the audience will have questions, including one from the previous session. I think the people who were here last year know your work and how great you are. I did a little bit of studying up beforehand, and I didn't realize that you were one of a group of students that actually started this, that this began sort of as a project under the Media Reform Center at the university in Kyiv, right?
Yes. Unfortunately, I was not a student at that time because I was an experienced editor with 10-year experience.
I was going to say you must be incredibly young, way younger than I thought. So you were part of that group, though, right?
Yes, but I was like a student of like postgraduate program of the Kiev Mogila School of Journalism. It is one of the best journalistic programs in Ukraine, and the Mogila Academy is one of the most one of the better universities in Ukraine. So we like an academic-based organization.
Yeah. I think that's fantastic, and it's a great model for us here. We should think about this. Just a couple of things to point out that you are not funded by the government of Ukraine. That you're funded by donations and crowdfunding, right? That you are financially independent from the Ukrainian government.
Initially, we were just volunteers, but then we realized that we need some funding because it's a loan play, unfortunately. So we started applying for grants to reputational funds and also donations. Yes, any government. We are not funded by government because I think it's a matter of trust. When you are funded by government, the trust
Exactly. And similar to Medusa, Stop Fake has a wonderful English language website. All of us can follow this. I've enjoyed following it. You have little videos that are in English. So that's great if we want to just catch up on what's going on. But aside from people like us who are interested, that your primary targets are Russian speakers in Eastern Ukraine who receive a lot of news from Russian television. Is that right? That's what your website said. And also Western journalists. Those are your main audiences, the Russian speakers in Eastern Ukraine?
Not only Eastern Ukraine, but yes, it's our very target audience because unfortunately we have a part of Eastern Ukraine occupied by pro-Russian militants and Russian soldiers. So it's very important for us to give some information for these people.
Okay, well, let's see your presentation, and then I have a couple questions, and we'll get audience questions.
Okay. 1 second, let me just share my presentation.
This is always the hard part of Zoom.
Yes. Mm.
Perfect. We can see it.
Oh, do you see it? Okay. Yes, 2 years ago, I had the honor to speak at the conference, Journalism Under Fire in incredible Santa Fe, and I wish I could be there right now, but the new times, new challenges. So nevertheless, I am still glad to see you and share our experience and findings. Let me remind you very briefly of what I spoke about 2 years ago in March, because it's like a context for understanding what I speak about. In March 2014, we created the Stop Fake project, as we mentioned with Janet. In those days, unmarked Russian soldiers invaded Crimea, and Russian media went crazy with fake news about Ukraine. So a group of journalists, including me, started a website to investigate this fake news. We decided to check news about Ukraine in the media using journalistic methods like photos, videos, and other strong evidence. If the news turns out to be fake, we put it on our website. If not, we do nothing. Thus, we collect an archive of fake news about Ukraine on our website. We were all volunteers, as I mentioned, and hoped that these challenges are temporary and will end soon. But recently we celebrated the 6th anniversary of our work. And during this time, Stop Fake has become an information hub, which analyzes fake news and propaganda in all its forms. We have checked more than 10,000 news stories and debunked more than 3,000 fakes. We have 13 language versions now. We have done trainings for more than 10,000 people. It's a very wide variety of groups, diplomats, students, judges, military, and so on. And we also teach fact checkers all around the world. Now we develop elements of media literacy for implementation in the curricula of Ukrainian schools. And already 650 schools in Ukraine teach media literacy. And we do research on the information that we collect. We inform not only our direct audience, but also policymakers about their results, so that they can make better and more informed decisions. And I talked about one of the studies in Santa Fe 2 years ago. We've collected enough fake news to identify the underlying narratives behind them. We have identified 18 such narratives. There were they may be more or fewer depending on the level of detail. What are these narratives? For example, that Ukraine is a fascist state, or Ukraine is a failed state, or Ukraine is a state run by a junta who came to power as a result of a coup d'etat. The constant repetition of these narratives proved then these facts were not accidental or bad journalism, but a deliberate campaign of disinformation against Ukraine. And we have conducted 2 such studies. Their results are about the same. Now, these narratives are still supported by the Russian media system. However, the word junta has disappeared from the mainstream media, but some new narratives have been added. They are related to current events in political, military, and cultural life, in diplomacy, and so on. For example, this is the narrative of discrediting the Ukrainian local Orthodox Church. Last year, the ecumenical patriarch officially recognized independence of Ukrainian Church from the Russian Church. This is just one example. So propaganda adapts to the situation and to new events. I have tried to summarize all these narratives in a slightly different way. For example, these narratives are aimed at discrediting the Ukrainian army, showing it as weak or brutal, it depends on the situation, or discredit the Ukrainian government, both for the world and for the Ukrainians themselves, to undermine our relations with Western partners, and ultimately return Ukraine to Russia's sphere of influence. So, in short, the goal of this propaganda is to discredit everything Ukrainian. You can see it now in short way. So all these narratives are aimed to discredit the Ukrainian statehood. It's the purpose of these narratives. In 6 years, there has been no less false news. Sometimes there were more of them. Propagandists repeatedly, sometimes weekly or even daily, publish new and new fakes to support those narratives in the information space. I also said that Russian disinformation efforts are not limited to Ukraine. Ukraine is a testing lab for methods of influence. Russia uses the same techniques in Western countries, including the United States. This has already been proven. These are narratives that exploit the weaknesses of Western democratic system in the same way that they exploited Ukraine's weaknesses in 2014. For example, one of the main Russian narratives is the West is Armageddon due to migration in the West. Now, how Russia promoting these narratives? This year, the US State Department published a report that mentions 5 pillars of Russian propaganda. Sorry, it's just about the illustration for church, for Russian fakes about church. Yes, and 5 pillars of Russian propaganda, and our experience shows the same. So I think it's important to say this. The Russian propaganda ecosystem is based on 5 pillars. First, official communications of the authorities. It includes statements of the Kremlin or ministries, official posts of the authorities, on social networks, statements of Russian politicians. Second is global state-funded information service. Russian media working for Russia and abroad, Kremlin-funded foreign media, and Kremlin-funded informational social cultural institutions. And third is proxy resources. These are Russia-related global and local media in different countries, conscious and unconscious influencers, speakers, experts who promote Russian narratives and spread these narratives at the official level of other states. Fourth are social networks. It means infiltration into the internal affairs of countries and incitement to internal conflicts and protests. And the last pillar is cyber disinformation. It includes publication of hacker information, seizure and cloning of sites, forgery of documents, attacks of official resources or objective media. The first pillar is directly connected with the Kremlin. The second is a little further away. And the Kremlin can easily distance itself from the other 3. They say that Russia is useless here. All 5 pillars are used to create and spread false narratives. I mentioned them related to Ukraine. In Russian military strategic circles, this process is called information confrontation. And this term is relevant for both military and peaceful contexts. The older term active measures, Soviet term, is also used. What happened in Ukraine during this time? The most important event for us is that the presidential elections were held in Ukraine last year. The well-known comedian Vladimir Zelensky became the president of Ukraine. I think you heard about this. Of course, the elections were accompanied by a massive Russian disinformation campaign. Nothing new to us, but we have noticed an alarming trend. In addition to efforts aimed at Russian and Western audiences, now separate disinformation efforts are directed at the citizens of Ukraine. Before, this were only some pro-Russian groups, but not the entire population of the country. It looks like Russia has decided to try to hack Ukraine from the inside. The majority of Ukrainians still get their news from TV. If a candidate is not shown on TV channels from the top 10 ratings, he or she will not become president. In Ukraine, broadcasting of Russian TV channels involved in disinformation is limited. But there are several TV channels that are associated with Viktor Medvedchuk. He is father in God of Putin's daughter, and he is an owner of 3 popular TV channels in Ukraine. For example, one of these channels showed a propaganda film by director Oliver Stone, revealing Ukraine. Our team found at least 8 fakes in it, behind which are the narratives I mentioned. For example, the fact that allegedly Ukraine and not Russia interfered in the course of presidential elections in the United States in 2016. It is not true, obviously. But this is not all. Unfortunately, the Ukrainians themselves helped Putin to spread his narratives. All presidential candidates actively criticized then President Petro Poroshenko. This seems to be normal. It usually happens in elections. Worse, that their criticism repeated Russian narratives and discredited everything that Ukraine had achieved in 5 years. For example, medical reform was called medical genocide. Policy on utility bills also was characterized by the term tariff genocide, and so on. Poroshenko was also accused of the war going on in eastern Ukraine for 6 years. People got tired of the war and began to forget who started it. During Poroshenko's presidency, civil society and the press began to talk a lot more about corruption. This does not mean that under the previous president, Viktor Yanukovych, who fled to Russia, there was less corruption. Under his rule, some of them were simply afraid to talk about this issue. As a result, voters formed the opinion that corruption under Poroshenko was the highest in all 30 years of Ukraine's independence. It was not true. This is where honest journalists and media had to play their role and analyze the situation and carefully explain it to the audiences. Instead, they hunted for clicks, savoring more corruption scandals without deep comparison and analysis. Now, I am not even talking about the TV channels owned by the oligarchs. Each of them promoted its own presidential candidate. As a result, Ukrainian TV channels and political rivals have raised not only skepticism in society, but hatred of Petro Poroshenko. But at the same time, they presented in a distorted light all the achievements that the Ukrainian society has achieved over these years. It would seem that what has Russia to do with it? During the presidential campaign, it also spurred hatred of President Poroshenko through its channels. Zelensky has been a positive hero on Russian TV and pro-Russian TV for a long time. He is close to Russia. Russia can conduct a dialogue with him, and Poroshenko's dirty campaign is being waged against him. Perhaps he will even manage to negotiate peace with Russia. Here is the prime time talk show on Russian TV, Channel 1, where he is praised, if only not Poroshenko. But once Zelensky became president, the rhetoric of the Russian propaganda machine began to reverse. Russia began to impose on Ukraine the idea of the so-called Steinmeier formula. It proposed to give the occupied territories of eastern Ukraine a special status within Ukraine so that they can participate in the Ukrainian elections. Ukraine, on the other hand, insists that election can be held only in a safe environment and only under Ukrainian control. This discussion sparked large-scale protests in Ukraine. Russian media began to say that Zelensky was hindered by an aggressive minority. It is a term they coined for patriotic citizens of Ukraine. Then the rhetoric intensified. Some of them began to name the Russian-speaking Zelensky a Nazi and a Russophobe who had forgotten about his Jewish roots. Now, these characteristics dominate in the Russian media. What does this mean? For Russia, there are no good or bad Ukrainian presidents. A good Ukraine for Russia is one that is completely dependent on Russia, because it is not a specific president that is attacked, but the very institution of the presidency in Ukraine. Unfortunately, Ukrainian politicians and media have done a lot to discredit Ukrainian democratic institutions in the eyes of Ukrainians themselves. I think the lesson that can be learned from this will be useful not only for Ukrainians, for us. It is necessary to distinguish an attack on political opponents from an attack on state institutions. The balance in the world is now very fragile. And we, as journalists, need to remember even more about the need to cover the situation responsibly. Now, the main narrative promoted by Russian and pro-Russian information channels in Ukraine is that Ukraine is under external Western control. And this allegedly happened after Zelensky became president. In this context, and due to the COVID-19 situation, propagandists have stepped up the narrative, old narrative, on the Pentagon's secret biological labs. They allegedly exist in Ukraine and some other post-Soviet countries disobedient to Russia, such as Georgia or the Baltic states. In fact, these labs are not secret, and it's like a collaboration between Ukraine, for example, and the US. And they, of course, have nothing to do with the coronavirus pandemic. With the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, Russian media actively adopted it to upgrade their messages. Interestingly, most of the messages that Russia is promoting about the coronavirus are anti-Western. In this case, the messages for Western, Russian, and Russian-speaking audiences largely coincide, although they have different ultimate goals of influence. But the material is often used the same. We all know about a huge number of conspiracy theories and rumors that are spread in messengers around the world. For example, that Bill Gates, together with a secret world government, planned a pandemic to eliminate the majority of the world's population. Coronavirus here acts as a fabricated product or biological weapon. Official Russian media and pro-Russian Ukrainian media are also spreading these fakes. One of the topics of Russian disinformation is that 5G towers cause coronavirus. It is surprising to me that Ukrainians often repost such news. Although there is no 5G connection in Ukraine at all. And I will go, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I will not go into too much detail on these fakes because you know all of them very well, but let me dwell in this context of the narratives that are directed against Ukraine. The first is that Ukraine is so weak that it will not survive the epidemic. It will simply cease to exist as a state. The second narrative is that in the face of a common challenge, which is a pandemic, the whole world must unite and forget old grievances. For example, forget about Russian aggression in Ukraine and nullify all sanctions in the world, including those imposed on Russian politicians and Russian business in many Western countries. The same message to lift sanctions was being promoted by Russian diplomats and at various levels around the world. Putin also wrote about this, among other things, in his article for National Interest, which came out this year. Thus, the conspiracy theories is more of a condiment that distracts from the real propaganda discourse. Its goal is to turn Russia from a dangerous aggressor into a legitimate partner, lifting sanctions and ultimately changing the world order in the direction desired by the Kremlin. The current situation is not only a big challenge for Ukraine, it's also a challenge for the democratic world. Are the leaders of the countries able to think strategically and not make concessions to an aggressor who openly violates international law? Such concessions could ultimately kill democracy. And that is why it is worth being especially firm now in your position and in maintaining sanctions. This is the only way to stop Russian aggression. But what about the situation inside Ukraine? In terms of COVID disinformation. In March, Ukrainian journalists investigated the case of panic and protests in the small town of New Sanjar. Ukrainians evacuated from China were brought for observations there. Some of the protesters even threw a stone at the bus with people. The protests were stopped by the police. Journalists investigated the situation. It turned out that the panic and protests were provoked in groups on social networks and messengers, and journalists investigated that these groups were orchestrated from Russia. Russia carries out the same operations of influence not only in Ukraine, but throughout the world. I would like just recall the latest study by Graphica, which exposed the so-called secondary infection propaganda campaign. For 6 years, Russian agents flooded the internet with fake stories in 7 languages through 300 websites and social media as part of the disinformation campaign. It's just one such campaign. There are many. In addition, media affiliated with the Kremlin distribute messages that polarize the Ukrainian and set them against their own government. For example, false news about unfair quarantine fines or that the quarantine in Ukraine will last over 2 years, or the tests for COVID-19 in Ukraine are infected, or so on and so forth. Their goal is to sow mistrust within the country. For example, the false piece about an elderly woman who died of a stroke because the Ukrainian police fined her for selling on the street. In fact, no older women were fined that day. Or that soldiers with coronavirus are being shot in the Ukrainian army. Or that the American vaccine is being tested on Ukrainian soldiers. Another very recent narrative is an attempt to impose on Ukraine the purchase of a Russian vaccine that has not yet passed all the necessary tests. Just yesterday, I read a false item that Britain allegedly wants to conduct a disinformation campaign in Russian together with Ukraine against the Russian vaccine. What lesson can we learn from this as journalists? At least the one that is worth evaluating the news in terms of how it will affect public trust. If trust is at stake, you should be even more careful when verifying this information and try to trace its origin. I would also advise governments to improve their communications and make it consistent. But we have a conference for journalists, so I won't talk about it. We really have many challenges, but we also have some good news. Ukraine has joined the Facebook fact-checking program. Now Stop Fake and our colleagues from the Box Check organization have become independent fact-checkers who collaborate with Facebook. Our fact-checkers mark news that we have checked and identified as false or partly false. This information appears less often in the news feed. This reduces the spread of inaccurate content and minimizes the number of views. After tagging a post, Facebook warns people who see it or want to share it that the information is inaccurate. In addition, pages and domains that regularly distribute fakes lose the ability to monetize content and place ads. If the video is fake, then in order to open it, you need to make an extra click. People are lazy, so many of them do not make this click. The lion's share of these fakes are conspiracy theories and rumors about the coronavirus. And now we are interfering not only with the Russian media, but also with those who sell pseudo drugs for coronavirus or are a fanatic of the theory of pandemic. We have never received so much hatred and threats as now. From the very first day when we started checking information on Facebook, Russian media began to actively try to discredit us, especially in the eyes of Western society. Their satellites in Ukraine and abroad did the same. The target in this case is our collaboration with Facebook. We are the only organization in Ukraine that fights against Russian propaganda and now has the leverage to stop it on Facebook. I analyzed this issue and realized that not only we are faced with this, but also independent fact-checkers around the world have the same problem of discrediting of them. And Russia is not the only player here. The target is the credibility of the fact-checkers, because a society where no one trusts anyone is a society that is easy to manage. In other words, divide and rule. Therefore, it is very important to remember about trust. The goal of disinformation campaigns is not only to sow mistrust towards each other, but also to turn it into hatred. And our goal is to find this trust and grow it, because it is trust that is the foundation of democracy. Trust in our political leaders, our government and public institutions, our media, science, medicine, medical science, our fellow citizens, and many other issues. And we need to think about how to rebuild this trust in our society. How can we do this? First of all, by providing accurate, verified facts, delivering them to audiences and putting them in the necessary context. And by promoting the idea of media literacy, because reliable facts is the foundation without which trust is impossible. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Olga, and Janet's coming right back on, and we'll take some questions from the audience. And
okay, I think you've stopped my video. Okay, there we go. Got it. Okay, fascinating presentation. We do have some questions from the audience, but I'm going to take the moderator's privilege and ask quickly first. We have a lot of fact checking here, and of course, you know, the Washington Post, for example, has documented every single lie that President Trump has made, and there were well over 20,000. Don't fact checkers end up sort of what we would call preaching to the choir, meaning that the people who bother to read fact checkers are already skeptical of misinformation, and that the people to whom the misinformation is directed are probably not going to bother to check fact checkers? Has that happened? Has that happened in Ukraine, or is this just an American thing?
Yes, unfortunately, it has happened. It happens in Ukraine. I think that maybe the cause of this is Russian influence. I think that we like yes, we are threat to Russian influence in Ukraine, because Facebook is one of the most of the biggest channels of dissemination these narratives. So now we understand how it is to be target of such campaigns.
Right. Yeah. You know, ever since in the United States, when Kellyanne Conway said, well, you know, these are just alternative facts, that maybe now we live in a world where there are some people who would prefer to live in the world of alternative facts and don't really care that, you know, that what the Russians are saying is not true. They prefer that world. Have you seen that happening in Ukraine?
Yes, unfortunately, yes, we see this in Ukraine, and I think it's a world trend, because I mentioned about I told about our elections and the results of them. Our new president, Volodymyr Zelensky, is an actor without any political background, and so it's a situation when people.
Right.
Yes, you understand.
Yeah. Well, you're fighting the good fight. Now we have a whole bunch of questions from the audience, some really good ones. Ann Cooper asks, have Stop Fake and other fact-checking groups developed new techniques or taken new approaches to your work to try to increase your effectiveness? And what are the biggest challenges today? Sort of over time since you began, have you developed new techniques? And what are the biggest challenges?
We think how to do this. We have a lot of conversation with, for example, with people who develop artificial intelligence and discuss how to use it in checking facts. But unfortunately, it can just help us, but not replace us, because there are a lot of issues, human-related issues like humor, satire, or some different meanings of words. Unfortunately, yes, but now artificial intelligence can effectively identify, for example, botnets or troll farms or something like this, because they have an inauthentic behavior. But
Right.
yes, but talking about checking news, we still need people, and we still yes, it's not very difficult, but it's rather time-consuming work.
Well, you have a lot of admirers in Santa Fe and around the world. And Scott Bunton wants to know, life is expensive. You and your colleagues need food and shelter and other necessities. How do you said so many are volunteers. How are you able to pay the cost of your work? And how much do you have to spend a lot of time trying to raise money? And have you been able to increase the amount of money you're getting? And then this is an interesting question. What proportion of that financial support comes from within Ukraine, and what percentage comes from abroad? So how are you making money, and do you have to spend too much time trying to make money? And what about the percentage of support from inside versus outside Ukraine?
Yes, the most of us make money it's not the main source of our. Yes, we have some money from the grants and for our Stop Fake work, but it's not the main source.
Right.
For example, I'm an expert in different projects, and I do monitoring of elections, for example, for the Council of Europe, and Council of Europe supports this. For example, I conduct trainings because I am a media trainer, and sometimes I read articles as a journalist. I love this work. Unfortunately, I can't do this as lot as I want, but right. Yes. And my colleagues, the situation with my colleagues the same, similar. And talking about our funding, yes, we get majority of our funding from abroad, not from Ukraine. For example, from embassies of Great Britain or of the US. It's different grants, and it's like a part of our activity to apply for them.
Sure. And if anybody who's watching this who's interested, you can go to the Stop Fake website, and under the tab About Us, you list all of your funders. So it's transparent where you get your funding from. I think that's really good. Well, there's an interesting question about the any advice you might have for the Biden-Harris administration as they come in to support efforts such as your own and to counter fake information. If you were to be hired as an advisor to the Biden-Harris government, what would you tell them about? Aside from giving you guys a grant, what kind of advice would you give them?
I think that my advice can be just think critically about anything. Think critically doesn't mean to criticize everything. It's like it's rather about the trust, but about thinking
Sure.
during we trust, not trust everyone, right. But also you understand, don't trust everyone, right. But also don't be skeptical to everyone.
Right. I may have misrepresented the question slightly, because it was also, how could they help? What advice would you give them if they want to help you? If they want to help efforts such as yours. So this was my fault. I misread the question. Okay. Sorry. So if they want to help you, what advice would you give them? Or any of us?
we are used to count ourselves, so I think now. You have we have button report a fake on our website. We also have we are also very open in our social networks, social Facebook pages. So we can you can just if you have any idea that can help us, you can write us, and we will reply. And maybe I don't know. Maybe I think that it will be very useful to tell us about Ukraine-related information abroad, because we can't trace everything. So for us, it's very important to identify these narratives abroad, especially, for example, Santa Fe. I think it's not the very target of Russian disinformation, but if you get any narratives, Russian narratives, or any just any different narratives about Ukraine, it's interesting to think about it.
Sure.
To think how it. Yes.
A kind of final question. This is combining several questions we have. How effective is Russian disinformation in Ukraine, despite your best efforts, despite the 5 pillars of disinformation, all of these things? How effective is this? I mean, are the Russians, like, who's winning? Are they winning, or are you winning? How effective, if you have to, how are they doing in their campaign to mislead Ukrainians?
I think that this is pretty effective, because
they are effective, or you are effective. Sort of, which side is winning right now?
Now I meant them. Not we also are effective, but we can't. I don't know. We can't win them completely,
right?
Because we have our own audience. Some audience don't want to know anything about fact checking or true or false information they get, or unfortunately, or critical thinking. And I just can see at the results of the elections, because we have in Ukraine, we have some pro-Russian parties and pro-Russian candidates, and unfortunately, they have some percent, yes, and significant percent of people who voted for them. So.
Well, I think this is something that is very familiar to Americans, that I think a lot of the Americans in your audience feel the same way and have the same kinds of worries, that despite the best efforts of fact checkers, that there are people who just want to believe the disinformation, and it's a constant fire hose of disinformation. So we so admire your struggle, and people who are interested should have a look at the website. It has a lot of information on it. There's some wonderful English language stuff, including regular English language videos that are fun to watch. And you'll really learn a lot. And it also has ways to report things. And I'm sure that if you want to provide any kind of support, that Stop Fake would be happy to talk to you about it.
We would be very grateful. Thank you so much.
It's such a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for your presentation. We have run a little bit over. I think Sandy is going to come back on and say goodbye. I'm not sure. Are you there, Sandy, or should I round things up? Or
I'll wrap it. Thank you, Olga, so much. That was a great overview and update of the important stuff that you're working on. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. We'll have to bring you back to Santa Fe down the road. So thank you for taking the time.
And thank you for inviting me and for this brilliant audience. I love Santa Fe, and hope we will see each other there.
You're always welcome. And Janet, thank you. You are a force in moderating. I appreciate you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's great fun. It's great fun. This is, and actually, Olga, it's snowing here in upstate New York, the first snow of the year too. So it must be some kind of synergy. So.
Well, thanks to both of you. Of course, for the rest of us, we have another panel coming up at 5:30 Mountain tonight with Alfredo Corchado, the one and only, his wife Angela Kucherga, who's a reporter at the Albuquerque Journal, and Dudley Althouse. They also presented at Journalism Under Fire 2018, and we're really looking forward to that. So that's 5:30 Mountain tonight. We'll see you then. Meanwhile, have a great day. Bye, everyone.